Welcome to the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show with Larry Lawson. As a former career law enforcement officer and law enforcement educator, Larry focuses on the use of tried and true law enforcement investigative techniques in conducting paranormal investigations. Despite his experience and training, Larry also keeps an open mind to discussions on topics that deal with evidence that are not quite as physical in nature. Paranormal Stakeout guests are professionals in the field of the paranormal and parapsychology, conducting the investigations and research needed to further the cause of paranormal study. Larry advocates an agenda of standardization of structure and training in the field of paranormal investigation and research for the purpose of one day being able to produce the evidence needed to convince a jury of the existence of the paranormal. Whether it is ghosts, UFOs, unsolved mysteries, hauntings or cryptids, no topic is beyond the investigative reach of Larry Lawson and the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show team. Now, here is the host of the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show, Larry Lawson.
And good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout. I'm your host, Larry Lawson, coming to you as always from beautiful Vero Beach, Florida, the headquarters for the Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation and Indian River Hauntings. And so glad to be back with all of you tonight. Got a really interesting show. Now, we will be talking about ghosts. Yes, tonight we'll be talking about ghosts, but we're also going to be discussing something that really is as near to my heart as the paranormal, and that's history. Folks don't realize the connection between the two. And tonight we're going to discuss that with my guests. We're also going to be talking about Florida. Yes, this wonderful state that I live in, along with so many other folks, and its connection to the rest of the world. My guest tonight is Miss Chessy Ricca. She's a Florida native who specializes in art and Florida history. She is currently the curator of the Historical Society of Martin County, and that includes the Elliott Museum in Stewart, as well as the House of Refuge. And we'll explain what that is as we go on to the show tonight. Chessy's history research spans everything from Pedro Menéndez, that's the guy that founded St. Augustine, all the way up to the moonshiners in the prohibition era, and another group that we're going to discuss tonight, and a group that still might be around, and that's called the Ashley Gang that terrorized the east coast of Florida in the 1920s. Her research also recently gained her a role on a television show, Josh Gates' Discovery Channels. They did a whole thing on the Ashley Gang there, so that was a pretty interesting show. And despite being such a well-known historian in Martin County, Chessy's also a paranormal investigator. So with that, I'd like to welcome Chessy Ricca to the show. Good evening, Chessy. How are you?
Hi, Larry. I'm good. I'm happy to be
Good.
here. Thank you for inviting me to join your podcast tonight.
Well, it's going to be interesting because we talk about so many different things in the show, Chessy, but we don't always get to the root of what's important with anything to do with paranormal investigation, and that's historical research. I
Mhm.
really folks around here know you. They know your reputation as being one of the preeminent historians in our area. But I'd like you to share with the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Oh, well, thank you. I started out actually as a painter. You know, my bachelor's degree is in fine art, concentrating in painting. So I painted Florida landscapes, and one of my inspirations were Florida's highwaymen. So I really enjoyed how they captured light. Now, when I went into fine art school and I was painting, I really struggled with the what I was painting because I wanted to know more about the land, things that happened on this land that I'm painting. And to get a better understanding of my topics in art, I really wanted to learn how to research, and I had no idea how to research other than a simple Google search. And at the time, I was working as a mate on a fishing boat, which I did for 10 years. And that was a fun job. But after 10 years, my body started to hurt. And I applied to some programs for fine art to go into a master's degree. And I actually didn't get into any of them. But the one program that I applied to just on a whim was USF, the University of South Florida, St. Pete campus, because they offer a program in Florida studies. And my thinking back then was, well, I can get a degree in research so that I can combine my passions of painting and Florida history and really come up with some interesting art compositions that cover the beauty of Florida, but also give the history so that people who are currently living in the state or moving to the state or not even in the state kind of can see a visual of what Florida history looks like through an artistic eye.
Yeah, and people look at Florida as sun, fun, citrus trees, beaches. They don't realize the deep history here and the impact it's had on the rest of the nation. And many times it's lost. Florida is the home, even though it's a relatively new state, the home of the oldest city in the nation, which is
Hmm.
part of what you've been studying. Also, your master's studies have been on an individual who founded St. Augustine. So that was
Yes,
Pedro
Pedro
Menéndez.
Menéndez de Avilés. Yes, he's a fascinating character. What I studied with him in grad school was his contract, and my professor specializes in paleography, which is the study of ancient text. So in
Mhm.
his program, he really had us diving deep into primary source material. So he taught us how to read the handwriting of the scribes back at, in 1565. And so we could really study those primary sources to get a better idea of the truth in how our state came to be what it is today. So my master's thesis, which I'm currently finishing up, um, I compare his contract, and what was written down on paper versus what actually happened. So, you know, m- oops, much like the paranormal world we live in today, I'm always trying to find truth. I'm always trying to debunk things. And in a history book that you can pick up today, I'll open the pages and see what sources they used. And almost 9 times out of 10, they never used primary source material. So that was one of the things we focused on in grad school.
Excellent. Now, one of the things as curator of the Martin County Historical Society, you have two fantastic buildings that you work in: House of Refuge, Gilbert's House of Refuge, as well as the Elliott Museum. Can you explain to the folks, because this is going to be part of the discussion later, what is the House of Refuge? What's it all about?
That's a great question, and it's a common question. So it's called Gilbert's Bar, House of Refuge. And there's two parts to that name there. You have Gilbert's Bar, and then you have House of Refuge. And a lot of times when we get tourists that come into town, they show up to the House of Refuge thinking we serve alcohol. But in fact, it's a different kind of bar. So Gilbert was a pirate whose name was Don Pedro Gilbert. And a bar today in nautical terms is really a shoal. So it's shallow water where there might be high sand followed by troughs of deeper water. So you would have sandbars, deep trough, sandbars. So Gilbert's Bar was the sandy shoal that the pirate kind of frequented, and he did frequent the area a lot. There's a lot of theories and stories, and even ghost stories surrounding Don Pedro Gilbert. And one of them commonly is that on a darkly lit night, you might see his ship in the Indian River Lagoon all lit up.
Oh,
So that's an interesting story, but the House of Refuge itself, it is the oldest wooden structure here on the East Coast in Martin County. It was built in 1876, and its purpose back then as a house of refuge was quite literally that. It was a house where people could seek refuge. Now, because we are called the Treasure Coast, for those of you who are not in Florida, if you look on a map, the central part of the state is commonly known as the Treasure Coast because of these bars. People would oftentimes find themselves shipwrecked. So back in the late 1800s, shipwrecks were so common that the life-saving service came up with a plan to create 10 houses of refuge. And they sat roughly 70-ish miles away from each other, so consecutively down the coast. So in theory, if you wrecked anywhere in that mileage, you could walk north or south and find a house of refuge. And that house of refuge back then was commonly run by a family or not. It would just be a single man, but if he was married, it would be his wife and kids. And it would be up to the keeper of the house and his family to take care of the shipwreck survivors. And we
Mm.
are the last remaining one. So because these houses sat so close to shore, you can imagine the elements that, gave these houses a beating, whether it was wind or salt water. None of them remain anymore. So we are the
Mm.
last one. So it's very important to keep this house alive and well.
And from what I understand, many of the areas that had houses of refuge sitting on them, even though the buildings aren't there anymore, they later became either Coast Guard observation points and maybe even a Coast Guard station. Is that correct?
Yeah. So actually, we're a really good example of that. So we went through a couple different services. So the first one was the life-saving service, and then it went into Coast Guard, and then it became a naval base during World War II, and then it was decommissioned in the 50s, and that is when Martin County and the Historical Society of Martin County took it over.
Ah. Now, I've got just a question for you here. Is it haunted?
What do you think?
Yeah, 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 it's probably one of the more famous spots down in your neck of the woods, which just to give folks an idea, Vero Beach is about 40 miles north of Stewart, where this is right now. Um, so it's a very interesting spot, and if you ever come down this way, even if you just, you're not looking for a paranormal event, please go by there and see that. Now, we're gonna take a break here in a few minutes, and we're gonna get into a little bit more about the House of Refuge and what the stories and things that come out of there and the Elliott Museum. But how did you get interested in the paranormal? You seem to be a very fact-based person that, uh, looks for the truth. At least some people have said to me, "How can you believe in the paranormal? I'm a cop. I search for the truth. How can I believe it?" Tell us about your story and how you got interested in the paranormal.
Well, I was born and raised in Florida, and I have a very vivid memory of my first paranormal experience, which, in my opinion, set it off for life. So I was about 5 years old, and my father graduated the University of Florida. And as a kid, we would oftentimes go to football
Okay.
games up in Gainesville.
Go Gators.
And yep, yep, yep. And oh, I wish I had my Gators jacket on, but I don't. And we stayed at this house in Micanopy, which is a very old Florida town. It's like a cracker town, but it's called the Herlong Mansion. And if you ever have a chance to go there, from what I remember as a kid, I mean, it was just full of crazy experiences, but the one in particular I'm talking about, um, I was 5 years old, and I had to use the restroom, which was downstairs, so my mother walked me downstairs, and there was a woman in white, in a long, flowy white gown who had this l aura about her. It was a white aura, and I remember tugging on my mom's arm saying, "Hey, mom, who's that woman?" And my mother was like, "What woman?" And when we got downstairs and I was in the bathroom, there was another ghost in the bathroom with me, and it was a different color, and it was green. And it's an image that is, like, forever burned in my mind. And because of that image in my mind, I feel like I've just always known, paranormal activity exists, but it created this never-ending pursuit of, the truth to what I saw, because it's obviously unexplainable, and at such a young age, to me, I didn't even think about it other than, "Hey, there's somebody else in this room with us. Are they alive?
Yeah.
What's the story here?"
With a historian, paranormal researcher, we've got a lot to talk about, but we're going to take our first break now. So, folks, stay with us here on Paranormal Stakeout with my guest tonight, Chessy Ricca. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back with my guest tonight, Chessy Ricca, down in Stuart, Florida. Chessy, we've talked a lot about your historical background and how you got into the paranormal. But for a long time, you were a part of a group, a very fine group I know of down in the West Palm Beach area, War Party Paranormal. How did you connect with them, and why did you connect with them?
That's actually a really funny story. I was interestingly at a potluck, and I was eavesdropping on a conversation behind me while I was waiting in line to get food. And this gentleman behind me was talking about how he had to leave soon because he was going on a ghost hunt. And instantly my ears perked up. And I remember apologizing and saying, "Hey, I couldn't help but overhear, this private conversation you were having, but can I ask what this paranormal, you know, ghost hunt thing is about. And he actually invited me on the spot and said I could join them that night. And it was at a cemetery in Tequesta, Florida called Riverside Drive.
Mm-hmm.
It boasts a celebrity, so Perry Como is buried there, for all you listeners who know who Perry Como is. He is a singer before my time.
Before mine.
And I went and I met his team, and they just seemed like a really interesting, down-to-earth group of people who put a lot of emphasis on the research portion of the paranormal. Prior to this team, I had very limited experience doing any sort of paranormal ghost hunts, we'll call it, because at that point I didn't do any research. So, you know, think about St. Augustine and they have the trolley tours. And that really was kind of my only experience with paranormal, was doing tours. So one of the ones I did before that was Savannah, Georgia, where they take you around and they show you some old buildings and tell you to take pictures, and you may or may not see something on your camera. So that was my experience with paranormal prior to joining this team. So when I saw the team, they put a lot of emphasis on the tools that they use, and they took a lot of pride in how they built these tools in their garages, just using old components that weren't in use anymore. And I really, as somebody who always tries to get to the truth of any story, I really thoroughly enjoyed the passion that they put into acquiring evidence and then trying to disprove what they may or may not capture. And that's War Party. They're a really interesting research paranormal team.
And a good team. And we've had the been fortunate enough to investigate with them ourselves. They're good folks. So hi to Zap, Scotty, and all those folks down in those neck of the woods. So that got you into it, and you worked with them for quite a while. And now you're still in Martin County. I know that you've been to Fellsmere a few times. You've seen what we had up there. But let's get to the House of Refuge. So many stories circulate around this area regarding what occurs there. Have you experienced anything there yourself?
Not very often. But most recently in October, I did have a small experience there, which isn't abnormal for me to have. Given it's the month of Halloween, we had two separate teams come and do an event for the museum. So you could pay, a certain amount of money, and you could have a private ghost hunt with a local team. And I, as curator, was kind of keeping my distance and letting the group do their thing. And I just make sure that the property doesn't get harmed. Nobody's smoking cigarettes or anything on the property. And I was standing outside between the house and the ocean, and I saw two shadow figures just bolt across the property. And I've seen shadow people before. A lot of times I see them. I've been to Ortona, which is just south of Lake Okeechobee, if you're looking at a map. I've seen shadow people there, but this was interesting because everybody in the group, it was like 20 people, they all had glow sticks on their chests so that we knew who was a paid guest. And then obviously we had the two paranormal investigators. And everybody had a station. We had walkie-talkies, so I knew where everybody was. There was nobody outside. I have a visual of the doors, so if anybody came outside. And I mean, it was like the fastest thing you could ever see. And it was clear as day, just these really dark, shadowy figures. And they bolted from the north side of the outside facade to the south side, just so fast, fast enough to where you could pick out a shape, but too fast for any live human to want to run across a really old rickety patio.
Okay.
And whether or not that was a person's shadow, I tried to debunk it. There were no cars going by. I tried to recreate myself to see if that casted a shadow, and it was really neat because I don't experience a lot of things there. Now the House of Refuge. Yes. So I've been in this position, I've been working there for about 3 years, and there's a lot of old timers who take pride in Martin County history, and so they've spent a considerable amount of time either being a docent or just visiting the House of Refuge. And a lot of times I get to hear ghost stories in those conversations. Now, those people will ask me if I experienced the same thing they did, and I have to sadly let them down and say, no, I did not experience that. But I also get to hear, these really interesting oral histories about the paranormal at the House of Refuge.
And I think that's the one thing that I'm impressed with is the fact that you just don't jump on the bandwagon and hear what everybody else has experienced and say, "Oh, I have too." I mean, that's the mark of a good researcher. So I applaud you for that. Um, how long have the stories been going on there? And probably what's the most common story that comes out of the house, if there is one?
Well, the land itself is just so old. If
Mhm.
you, a lot of our listeners aren't in state, but if you look at a map of Martin County and you look at Hutchinson Island where the House of Refuge sits, it's a really thin barrier island. You could walk from ocean to intracoastal in a matter of feet where the House of Refuge is. It's very thin there. And before there were, Europeans that came over to Florida, it was inhabited by Native Americans. So actually, there's burial mounds all over the island. And oftentimes, when we have a big erosion from a big storm or a hurricane, we have Native American bodies pop out. Now they are protected. It is an archaeological site. And there are a few archaeological organizations that monitor these sites, but there are bodies and they're old. I mean, not 100, not 300, not 500, thousands of year old Native American burials. So that's kind of the start of anything that might be paranormal. And then you have to put into consideration the 1715 fleet. Those
Yes,
were 10 massive ships carrying dowry from uh,
Central
there were
America.
two, yeah,
Yeah.
basically, I mean, Mexico and South, and they were traveling through the Bahama Channel, and a hurricane wrecked them and strewn the wreckage for miles along the coast, hence the name the Treasure Coast. But a lot of people died, and that was the 1700s. Then you have the 1800s where there was all sorts of lawlessness going on and frontier justice and sorts. Um, but then in more contemporary history in the 1900s, um, the House of Refuge definitely saw death as well. In 1904, there were two consecutive shipwrecks that happened within 24 hours of each other. So the first one was the wreckage of the George's Valentine, which was mid-October of 1904, and the second one was the day after. And the first wreck saw, I want to say, 7 lives were lost.
Mhm.
And I can't speak on behalf of the second wreck, but you have to imagine this is, the heart of a hurricane, and people. If you had a picture of the House of Refuge, it would be easier to explain. But this part of Florida is well known for their rock formations on the beach. There's a rock formation. The rocks are called Anastasia rocks. I don't know why they're called that name, but they're these large, um, intimidating rocks because they're high above water, they're high above sand. They're not sharp, but they're very holy, and the barnacles on them are sharp. And one of the ship log or um, the keeper of the House of Refuge in his logbook from that night described the men who were um, I forget the word he used, but basically the ship that wrecked was carrying lumber, and the combination of high winds and rough seas impaled. So these 7 men were impaled against these rocks with the
Mm.
lumber. So it was a pretty ominous evening, and to as a paranormal researcher to think about that type of energy being left there, there's no doubt in my mind you would get some sort of activity from that. I mean, that's just a horrible sight to envision.
You mentioned that there's stories of seeing Menendez's ship in the Indian River, which is essentially an intercoastal waterway between the mainland and the Barrier Islands. But do you have folks talk about seeing sailors or Spanish seamen that are on the beach?
I've heard a few stories of people who have captured. I've seen a photograph. Somebody captured a black mist in the background between them and the ocean. So the mist was behind them and the beach was behind them. But more oftentimes, I think what I hear the most in terms of the beach is actually sound. Now, Florida's East Coast is definitely covered with houses and all sorts of building right up to the shoreline. But the sounds that I got reports of were like drumming and chanting and things that you wouldn't necessarily hear in today's time period.
Uh,
One of those stories takes
Well,
place.
before you get into that story, we got to take our next break. So when we get
Not a
back, folks,
problem.
we're going to finish talking about the House of Refuge, but then we're going to talk about some of that lawlessness that went on in this neck of the woods during Prohibition and a group called the Ashley Gang. So stay with us. A lot more to talk about. Be right back. And welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout with my guest tonight, Chessy Ricca, the curator of the Martin County Historical Society down in Stuart, Florida. So I want to finish this little story that you began. I had to interrupt you on. So go ahead and finish that, and then I want to start talking about the other group. So I'll
Yes,
leave it
of
at that.
course.
So go ahead and finish your story.
Um, I can't even remember.
Well,
So
we were
long ago.
discussing. Yeah, it was so long ago. Well, let's get into the Ashley Gang then. Excuse me. This was a group that many looked at as being a Bonnie and Clyde type of group before Bonnie and Clyde, and they excuse me, and they ran rampant down here in the east central part of Florida for a number of years back in the 20s. So I'm going to let you go ahead, talk about who the Ashleys were and what paranormal stories are connected with them. Also, go ahead.
Yes. So the Ashley gang actually is not as well known as they should be, in my opinion, given the story. But in my research, I traced the family back. Now, John Ashley was the leader of this gang of bank robbers and moonshiners. Um, his family are Florida crackers going back generations. So you have like John Ashley's father, who worked on Flagler's Railroad when it came down. They actually lived in Cedar Key for a while before John was born. So going back into the early 1800s, the family is a typical Florida family given the time period. A lot of the men served in whatever was going on at the time, which they definitely served in both the Seminole Wars and the Civil War. Uh, and their jobs were very typical back then. So this is pre 1900s. We're talking 1800s here, Florida. And when you think about that, you picture citrus, railroads, lumber, turpentine, and cattle. So this family literally did all of that, and it was seasonal. Now Florida was kind of the last frontier. It's where, the northern states kind of sent their rejects, or it's where people came to find freedom. I think a lot of people overlooked the beauty of the state back then.
Also, people came down here to hide too.
Exactly. Yes. So the family, prior to the leader of the gang, John Ashley, being born, the family actually suffered a lot. There was a lot of death back then, and there was a lot of feuding. Florida was known for cattle feuds, and the family was involved in what was a famous cattle feud back in the day, but it seems to have kind of gotten forgotten to time. And actually, this cattle feud in the late 1800s is what brought the family from the West Coast over to the East Coast to try to build a new life for themselves. Just get out of this drama and the constant threat of a gun behind your back. because that's what feuding was like back then. You never know if you were going to get shot off your horse. And so the family moved to Pompano in the early 1900s. The dad, Joe Ashley, got a job working on the train, building train tracks and stuff like that. But Florida's jobs were seasonal. So if they all did agriculture in some way or another. They grew some sort of fruit, whether it was pineapple or citrus. And when that season was slow, you probably were a hunter or a trapper, or you did guided hunts, or you were a fishing guide. That's kind of what the state had to offer. So the family eventually got brought up into what was Palm Beach County prior to Martin County's founding in 1925. So again, if you're looking at a map, Palm Beach County was a lot bigger before 1925.
The whole area was different back in those next. But John Ashley ended up getting here. He ended up getting mixed up in some lawlessness. That included some bank robberies, tried to rob a train in Stewart. But I don't want to get it too far ahead of myself.
No, not at all. It's a really complicated story, to be honest. But the brief synopsis of it was, this was a poor family, and you kind of had to do what you had to do to survive. And when they weren't hunting and trapping or growing food, you were selling hides, you were making liquor, you were selling, moonshine to be able to feed your family. And it was a large family. So what started the whole drama took place in 1911 when John Ashley was sent down by his father to go deliver some otter hides to make money. And John was no stranger to working with the Seminole tribe of Florida. I mean, back then there were Seminole outposts kind of all over the place. And so John and another fellow, he was a Seminole, his name was DeSoto Tiger, they got on a canoe and paddled their way south to go sell these otter hides. And
there?
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Go ahead. We can hear you. Go ahead and finish the story.
Oh, I'm here. Okay. So what happened was, at some point between the Seminole outpost and where they went to sell furs, DeSoto Tiger's body mysteriously ended up in a canal, and it was found by a dredgeman about 2 days later. And so this really was the beginning of this story of John Ashley being on the run from cops, or the sheriffs back then. Now, he went through a lot of issue after this, but one of my mentors, Steve Carr, told me this quote, and I never forgot it. He said, "You can't tell history by today's standards. You have to tell history by history standards." And the truth of the matter was, if a Seminole Indian died back then, it wasn't not that big of a deal, but it just wasn't reported in the news. It wasn't, it wasn't something that was really noteworthy.
It's unfortunate, and it's not something that we look at and condone today, but it's history. I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's a tough thing to kind of describe, but
they blame John Ashley for the death. Is that what I'm getting?
Oh yeah. So John, which was just kind of unheard of, is like, now there was this sensation in the state and even nationwide of, this guy, John Ashley, killing DeSoto Tiger. And the issue is DeSoto Tiger was a Seminole chief's son. So it was kind of a big deal to the Seminole tribe of Florida. And John Ashley escaped back home. So he escaped the law, he escaped arrest, and he made it back home to Martin County. And this negativity didn't stop following him. So he had a warrant out. He was going to trial for, the death of DeSoto Tiger. And 3 trials later, and he's still on the loose. And after, during these trials, John and his gang of random men that came from all over. One came from Chicago. One was a stranger that got off of a train, and one was like a drug addict that they found in prison. And they all just kind of started this band of merry men. But the only way John could make money without the law was to conduct business illegally. And his way of avoiding the law was just to make money by robbing a bank, which, we found sources that prove the reason why he robbed the bank was to be able to pay for his lawyer because he couldn't afford a lawyer.
Okay.
And then the other side of the family is making moonshine.
Well, and they ended up to kind of make a longer story short, they end up getting into a shootout down in your neck of the woods, where John's father died. They took off, ended up the old Dixie Highway into my neck of the woods up here in the Indian River County area, and they were killed in 1924 by the sheriff of St. Lucie County up in this neck of the woods. And I kind of shortened up the story for you a little bit, but that's essentially what happened. They were running moonshine in the glades, robbing banks, and they were even importing booze, weren't they?
Oh yeah, because the Bahamas was international. There were no booze laws over there during the Prohibition, so as long as you didn't get caught stateside, it didn't matter.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong also, but the Ashley Gang was also looked at almost like a Robin Hood type of character by many people in the southern end of what is now Martin County. If I got that correct also?
Yeah, absolutely. See, the story is so misunderstood, and it's actually kind of sad because you have one side of the story that paints him as this really negative character, but then you have the other side of the story that really comes from like his neighbors and the people he grew up with. And these people, in their oral histories or their written histories, they didn't praise John, but they just described him as a really nice person with a good heart. And when he was on the run, he would stop in silently to a neighbor's house for food, and he would be fed. And when he left, the woman who picks up the plates or plate noticed that there was a $20 gold piece under the plate. And that was something John was known for, was leaving money in exchange for food. So obviously, when they started selling moonshine, John acquired some money, and when he was on the run, he was able to pay for his things. And the local population really did see him as a Robin Hood, because a lot of people back then did not like the law. The law was just as crooked as
Yeah,
your neighbor next door. So everybody was
absolutely,
just trying to make a buck.
true. And one of my favorite stories is Ashley leaving an elderly woman, and I don't know how accurate this is, but she was about to lose her house to the bank, and she wakes up one morning to find enough money to cover the mortgage under a rock by her front door. And that kind of endeared people to him. But eventually, they end up getting into the shootout. They end up heading up into the north end of St. Lucie County, which is now where I'm at in Indian River County. Got caught by the law, captured. They never made it to jail. It's a very short version of it. So their reign of terror ran pretty much the entire east coast of Florida, all the way up into our area here. Died in November of 24. But there are ghost stories attached to the Ashley Gang and all the things that they were involved in. We got about a minute for a break. Can you give us one just briefly before we take our break, and then we'll
Well,
hit
I'll
some
let
more
you
maybe?
think about something. So
All right.
they died October 31st of 1924. And what night is that?
All Hallows Eve, Halloween. Yeah. Oh, that's
Halloween.
interesting.
Yeah. Yep. So
So
November 1st, October 31st, November 1st is their night of their death. It's almost 100 years.
yeah, and the one story that I am aware of, that where they were killed on the bridge going into from present day Indian River County into Brevard County, which was Cape Canaveral is, um, there's still gunshots heard in the area where the bridge was at the time, and there's been reports of that. So when we get back, we're about ready to take our last break. I want to hear some ghost stories about the Ashley Gang, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about the importance of history and historical research and the paranormal research. So stay with us, folks. We'll be back right after this message. And welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout. My guest tonight, the curator of the Martin County Historical Society, Chessy Ricca, joining us from Stuart, Florida. Want to make a couple comments real quick. If you'd like to find out more about the Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation and Indian River hauntings, you can catch us on our website, paranormalfbi.com or indianriverhauntings.com. Also, our Facebook channel, if you'd like to check out some of the things that we're doing, at Indian River Hauntings 2341. And also, if you'd like to get a hold of me, Send me a message, maybe ask a question that I'll bring up at the beginning of each show. You can get a hold of me at ghostguy@paranormalstakeout.org. Also, you can check out the entire program and all my shows at paranormalstakeout.org. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention all the other great programming on the X Zone Radio and TV broadcast network. xzbn.net will get you to all of the great shows on the network. And I really encourage you. There's some really interesting things out there. And of course, my friend Rob McConnell and his show, The X Zone. So take a look at that. Chessy, how can folks find out more about you, the House of Refuge, the Elliott Museum? Got a website or someplace they can check?
Yeah, we do have a website, www.hsmc-fl.org is our website, but you
You
can just give it a simple Google search and the House of Refuge will take you directly to us.
Good. So, to folks, check that out. So, I gave you a lesson here before we got back into talking about history tonight is not a thing that we get a chance to do enough on this show because history is so very important. But I've given you a few minutes to think about that history and some ghost stories that go with the Ashley gang. So, go for it.
Yeah, there's a handful of stories. Uh, so you briefly talked about the shootout site, and the
Right.
shootout briefly is just what happened between the sheriffs and the Ashleys at their moonshine still.
Mhm.
There were two deaths. So John's father died, and then one of the sheriffs died. So you have, and this is at their moonshine still. So you have to think about, and I'm always thinking about the energy left over from incidents like this, where there was a big emotional experience. What happens to that emotional energy? Is it left behind? That, that's kind of where I believe in
Mhm.
more of a residual haunting.
Mhm.
Um, so that specific area, one of the first stories I would like to tell is actually recorded in writing in I can't remember which book it is. I want to say it's the Notorious Ashley Gang, but one of the members of the gang itself, um, his name was Albert Miller. Now, after the boys were killed in 1924, Albert Miller left and never came back. And he refused his entire life to talk to anybody about it. So there's really no written account of Albert Miller during or after any of this. We do know today that he's no longer with us. I think he died a couple decades ago. But his story is later in life, he finally came back to to where the moonshine still was, and it took him decades to be able to come back because the trauma of what happened was so much for him. He was shot um, at the moonshine still shootout. He had a buckshot. He almost took his arm off. So that's a lot of trauma. So he came back later in life and he was still petrified in his old age to be there because he was constantly afraid that the law was after him, even all these years later. So he goes by himself and he parks his car and he starts walking down a sandy trail where you can picture the big pine trees, just a hidden trail. And he's walking to the Ashley Cemetery, which is in super close proximity to where the moonshine still was. And he's just going to pay his respects. And so as he's walking down this trail, the sandy trail, he starts to notice something that he didn't expect, which was sounds of a moonshine still, and the light that was coming off of the flame that was used to light the water, the mash in the moonshine still. And so he is getting closer and closer, and he's questioning himself. He's questioning. He wants to turn back. Is this real? Is this fake? What am I experiencing? And he's hearing um, the stirring of the mash. He's hearing the glasses clinking against each other. He's hearing a moonshine still in operation. He's hearing laughter. He's hearing his friends communicating for the first time in decades. And so he's questioning his reality. He's questioning if his friends were even shot at. Are they still alive this whole time? And he had no idea that for decades his friends were still alive and well. So he gets closer to the cemetery and the sounds and sights get brighter and louder, and he makes it around the bend, and sets his eyes on the cemetery, and everything disappeared. All the sounds went away, the light went away, and he was just there alone with the grave markers of his friends. And that was one of the first Ashley stories I ever heard. I took you to the cemetery a couple weeks ago, and you got to see how kind of remote it was. Granted, it's on a golf course in a gated community.
And now it is, yeah.
Yeah, but it's still, if you didn't know it's there, you would have no idea that there's a cemetery there. Surprisingly, even though it's just west of Dixie, that back then was no man's land. Now, so like I said before the commercial break, they were shot. They were making their way up. The theory is that they were going up to Jacksonville to get work because the law was too much for them down here. And so on Halloween night, it was a rainy night. They were driving north from Martin County into St. Lucie County, and they were shot by 4 police officers, shot dead in cold blood, with handcuffs on them. So they had no way to defend themselves. So years later, this became a popular like paranormal destination. Is the bridge that they were killed on is no longer there. There's a new bridge there. But just to the west of the current bridge sits where the old bridge used to be. And I think if you park and maybe do some illegal trespassing, which I don't condone, you might find some residual pilings from that bridge there. So I think
I've been back there.
oftentimes,
You can't get to it. Trust me.
oh, good, okay. It's been a while. Not that I didn't do that. I didn't do anything illegal. I don't do that. But anyway, so on Halloween nights, oftentimes, if you're an Ashley fan, you'll find people there trying to communicate with John, to get the truth, to capture some sort of evidence, either on a recorder or on a cell phone or a camera. There's a lot of people interested in the paranormal side of the Ashley story, and there's so many reasons for that.
So, what do you think this paranormal thing is? Now, we've talked a lot about the history tonight. We've talked a bit about your background, but what is your theory about ghosts?
Oh gosh. Well, I have ideas on all sorts of different types of haunting because I've experienced in doing the ghost hunts with War Party Paranormal, the different levels of haunting. I've seen video footage. We did an experiment where we were in the Gulfstream Hotel, which is in Lake Worth,
Mhm.
and we did this experiment where we played music from the time period of when the hotel was in its boom era, and we captured a live video of a woman's shadow being twisted around like she was being danced in a ballroom dance because we were in a ballroom. And here's evidence of dancing. So to me, like that
You
type of
physically Did you physically see that when it happened, or did you just see it after you watched the video?
after the video was taken, it was I think
Okay.
it's still on Facebook. You can find it. It's a beautiful video. But to me, that was triggered by sound and location. So for me, that would be like a residual energy that's left there. Now, I also have experienced like smart entities or smart type of investigation where they can, um, actively answer questions with a knock or, in a device of some sort. So, I mean, to ask what my beliefs are, I certainly can say with 100% certainty that I believe in ghosts, but I certainly believe that every ghostly experience is special in and of itself. I think there's so many different circumstances that are in play, given the specific type of haunting. I mean,
Okay. Well, how does historical research play into paranormal investigations? And that's kind of how I'd like to wrap up tonight. Being a historian yourself, how do you see the two connected, and how important are they to be connected?
well, obviously, I'm very passionate about the Ashley Gang, but I'm also equally passionate about research and historical research at that. So when I'm doing, and we'll take the Ashley Gang as an example, when I'm conducting my Ashley Gang research, like Menendez, I use primary sources and I also use secondary sources. So primary sources would be, diaries or newspaper
Mhm.
articles from the time or anything that was firsthand account. Then you get into secondary sources.
How is
Can you
that
tell me your
important with
question?
yeah, how is that important to paranormal research? How is all
Right.
the historical research important to the paranormal?
So when I'm finished, like, doing my mundane research where I go into the primary and secondary source material, I always question, like, at night, in the back of my mind after work or whatever, y I wanna get into the emotional aspect of these histories. I wanna know what these people were feeling. I wanna know what they were thinking. I wanna know what happened. And the only way I in my mind as a paranormal researcher, I can think to do that is to utilize the spiritual realm as a form of research as well. So, in my downtime, if I can tag along with War Party and conduct some um, historical paranormal interviews, I'll try to reach out to the gang or their family, and I'll come up with a list of questions, and I'll try to see if I can get any type of paranormal evidence that can help me lead me down another trail or answer any questions I
Well,
have.
what about if you get some information in your investigation? A name, for example. How can the research that you do help verify that there's anything really to this name? Does that make
Well,
sense?
yeah, so I go, uh, if I get a name like that, absolutely, like, I'll get home or the next day at work, and I'll just start researching that and see if I can connect any ties.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Most of the time, I'm asking yes or no questions, and then I'll get into specifics, and a lot of times, I am just kinda left, with nothing, but every once in a
Or
while,
more
I'll get a hit.
questions, or more
Yeah, yeah.
questions. Well, unfortunately, Jesse, our time is about to run out, but I do want to thank you very much for joining me tonight. I appreciate the history lesson, and I hope, folks, that you get a better view of what Florida really is. It's not just sand and sun and citrus fruit. It's a place of great historical significance. So, appreciate you being with us tonight. Please do take care, hug your family, and until we meet again, take care, and we'll see you on the other side. Have a good night, folks.